It was an ordinary evening. A young black couple, Jason and Emma, were walking around the evening city. Nothing foreshadowed trouble when suddenly the police approached them and began to see them as a threat. Suddenly, the police attacked them. One of them grabs Jason, and the other attacks Emma and breaks her arm on the spot. The situation gets out of their control. But they didn't know that Jason is the new police captain, and what he did to the cops will shock you. Find out the tragic fate of Emma and Jason. Be sure to watch to the end. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so as not to miss our new videos. Your subscription motivates me very much. Do not regret subscribing. Also, write in the comments where you are watching this video from. Enjoy your viewing. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the unfamiliar streets of Millwood. Emma and Jason strolled hand in hand, a sense of hope and excitement coursing through their veins. The couple had recently moved to this vibrant city, leaving behind the shadows of their pasts, in search of a brighter future. As they wandered, the laughter of children playing nearby and the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from a local bakery filled the air, creating an atmosphere of comfort and possibility. "Look at that view," Emma exclaimed, pointing to a nearby park where the trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, a perfect backdrop for their new beginning. "Let's go check it out," Jason replied, a smile spreading across his face. As they made their way toward the park, Emma felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. This was a fresh start, a chance to build new memories and embrace the life they had always dreamed of. As they entered the park, they admired the families enjoying their evenings, couples like them sharing laughter, and friends gathering for picnics. However, as they walked deeper into the park, a feeling of unease crept into the atmosphere. The playful laughter faded into the background as they passed under a dimly lit street lamp, the flickering light casting elongated shadows on the ground. Suddenly, two police officers emerged from the darkness, their expressions serious and their demeanor aggressive. The officers, clad in dark uniforms, approached the couple with an air of authority that instantly put them on edge. "Hey, what are you two doing here?" one of the officers barked, his tone cold and accusatory. Emma felt her stomach knot as she sensed the underlying tension. "We're just taking a walk," Jason replied calmly, trying to diffuse the situation. He exchanged a concerned glance with Emma, who could feel the tension thickening in the air. "Just a walk, huh?" the second officer sneered, eyeing them with suspicion. "You both look a little suspicious to me." Emma's heart raced as she realized the implications of their words. It was a scenario she had read about but never imagined experiencing firsthand. She and Jason were a black couple in a predominantly white neighborhood, and the police were now treating them as if they were criminals, simply for existing. "Excuse me?" Emma said, trying to maintain her composure. "We're just enjoying the evening. We haven't done anything wrong." "Step back," the first officer ordered, ignoring her plea. He advanced toward them, taking a step closer to Jason, who instinctively moved in front of Emma, protectively. "What's your problem?" Jason asked, his voice steady, but laced with an undercurrent of anger. He could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins. "We're not doing anything wrong. You can't just accuse us like that." Without warning, the officer reached out and shoved Jason, sending him stumbling back. Emma gasped, stepping forward in shock. "Don't touch him!" she shouted, panic rising in her chest. The second officer, seeing the tension escalate, turned his attention to Emma. "You should watch your mouth, girl. You don't know who you're messing with." In that moment, everything shifted. The officers had crossed a line, and the couple could feel the gravity of the situation deepening. They had no idea who Jason was. His status as the new captain of police was unknown to them. "Enough!" Jason shouted, his voice booming with authority, trying to assert control over the chaos. "This is unacceptable." But the officers were unyielding, fueled by their prejudices. "You think you can just walk around here and act like you own the place? You're in the wrong neighborhood," the first officer spat, taking a step closer to Emma. The tension escalated rapidly as Emma's fear transformed into fury. "We have every right to be here," she exclaimed, her voice shaking but defiant. In a split second, the first officer raised his hand and struck Emma. A brutal blow that caught her off guard. She staggered, gripping her arm in pain. Jason felt a surge of rage coursing through him, but his own injuries from the past echoed in his mind. He had already faced his mother's assault. Now he was witnessing the brutalization of the woman he loved. "Stop! You can't do this!" Jason shouted, stepping forward, but the second officer moved in to block him, shoving him back. "Get away from her!" Jason growled, feeling helpless and enraged. Emma fell to the ground, clutching her arm, tears streaming down her face as the shock set in. The world around them blurred as their reality collided with a nightmare. As the officers continued to berate them, Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He had wanted to start anew, to create a life filled with love and happiness. Yet here they were, faced with the very prejudice and violence they had hoped to escape. This was not just an attack on them. It was an attack on their very existence, their dreams, and their future together. And in that moment, Jason realized that this was only the beginning. The darkness of the night closed in around them, and their lives would never be the same again. The air was thick with tension as Jason knelt beside Emma, who was on the ground, struggling to catch her breath through her tears. The world around them faded away, and all that mattered was the pain etched across Emma's face and the anger boiling inside him. "Stay with me, Em," Jason urged, his voice low and steady, but inside he felt a storm brewing. The police officers continued to tower over them, their expressions a mix of arrogance and disdain. "Get up, girl," one of the officers commanded. "You can't just lie there. We don't have all night." Jason's heart raced as he instinctively wrapped his arms around Emma, shielding her from their gaze. "She's hurt," he protested, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You need to call for an ambulance." But the officers just laughed, dismissing his plea as if it were irrelevant. "You're just a couple of troublemakers," the first officer sneered, "and troublemakers don't get sympathy." The scene was surreal, as if it were playing out in slow motion. Jason could feel his blood boiling. He had dedicated his life to serving and protecting, and now, standing here in the shadows of the city he aimed to improve, he felt powerless. The very institution he had sworn to uphold was being perverted by the men before him. As the second officer stepped closer, Jason felt a rush of adrenaline. He had to do something, anything. The fear of losing Emma, the love of his life, ignited a fire within him that he hadn't known existed. "Why are you doing this?" Jason shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "We've done nothing wrong. You can't just attack us because of the color of our skin." The officers exchanged glances, their smirks fading for a brief moment. They clearly underestimated him, but he could sense their resolve hardening. "You think you're special?" the first officer spat, stepping forward aggressively. "You're just another black face in a white neighborhood." Those words stung, cutting deeper than any blow. Jason had spent years trying to rise above the stereotypes and prejudices that plagued his community. He was more than just a black man. He was a captain in the police force. He had worked tirelessly to prove himself. And now, here he was, reduced to a target of their hatred. "Stop it!" Emma cried out, her voice breaking. "You don't have to do this. Just leave us alone." But her words only fueled the officer's aggression. One of them moved toward her, a menacing glint in his eye. Jason's instincts kicked in, and he pushed himself between Emma and the officer, refusing to let them touch her again. "Don't you dare lay a hand on her," he growled, the authority in his voice ringing true. But deep down, he knew he was fighting a losing battle. Just then, the first officer drew closer, shoving Jason back with a forceful hand. "You think you're in charge here?" he taunted, laughing as if he were in control. "You're nothing. You can't change the way things are." Jason's world spun as the officer's words sank in. They were right about one thing. He wasn't in charge. Not here, not now. But he had to find a way to turn the tide. This wasn't just about him or Emma. It was about every person who had ever faced this kind of injustice. As the second officer prepared to strike again, Jason felt a surge of determination. He had to do something to protect Emma and himself. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he warned, trying to project confidence despite the fear gnawing at him. "I'm not just some random guy. I'm a police officer, and I will report this." The officers paused, exchanging wary looks. For a fleeting moment, doubt crossed their faces, but it quickly dissipated as their bravado returned. "You think that matters?" the first officer scoffed. "You're just a black cop. You think you can make a difference?" With that, the second officer lunged forward, and the world erupted into chaos. Jason braced himself, instinctively pushing Emma behind him as he prepared to defend her. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. "Help!" Emma screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the cacophony of violence. In a desperate attempt to protect her, Jason lunged at the officers, but they were quick to retaliate. The first officer shoved him hard, sending Jason sprawling to the ground. Dizziness washed over him as he fought to regain his composure, his vision blurring momentarily. As he looked up, he saw Emma on the ground, clutching her arm, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her pain pierced through his heart like a knife, and it ignited a primal instinct to fight back. This wasn't just about the physical battle. It was about standing up against a system that had failed them. The sirens blared louder, and the approaching lights illuminated the park. Jason could see shadows of other officers in the distance. But would they help, or would they side with their corrupt colleagues? The officers were momentarily distracted, and Jason seized the opportunity. He staggered to his feet, standing tall despite the fear coursing through him. "You think you can get away with this? You will pay for what you've done." His voice rang out, echoing in the darkness. He would not let this stand, not for Emma, not for himself, and not for every person who had suffered at the hands of those meant to protect. As the sounds of the approaching sirens grew louder, Jason took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He had to fight back, not just for his own dignity, but for justice. This was the beginning of a battle that would change their lives forever. The blaring sirens finally reached the park, cutting through the tension like a knife. As the bright lights flooded the area, Jason felt a glimmer of hope spark within him. Maybe help was finally here. Maybe justice would prevail. But as he looked around at the scene, he realized that the arrival of more officers might complicate things further. 2 new officers emerged from the patrol car, their expressions unreadable as they surveyed the chaotic scene. Jason's heart raced as he wondered which side they would take. Would they support the corrupt officers or stand by the truth? "Step away from them," one of the new officers shouted, immediately putting his hand on his holster. Jason raised his hands, trying to convey that he was not a threat, but the air was thick with tension. Emma was still on the ground, her face pale from the pain and fear. "We need medical assistance," Jason called out, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "She's injured." "Who is injured?" one of the new officers asked, glancing at Emma before looking back at Jason. "What happened here?" "They attacked us for no reason," Jason exclaimed, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "They assaulted my wife and broke her arm." "Is that true?" The second new officer turned to the original officers, who stood defiantly with their arms crossed, smirking at the unfolding drama. Before the first officer could respond, Jason stepped forward, refusing to let this moment slip away. "You have to listen to us. This is a case of racial profiling and police brutality. We were just walking in the park." He gestured toward Emma, who was trying to sit up, wincing in pain. "She needs help, and we need justice." The new officers exchanged glances, visibly caught off guard by the situation. "Can you give us your names?" one of them asked, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Jason Thompson," he replied firmly, the name rolling off his tongue with a sense of pride. "I'm a captain in the police department." The two new officers' expressions shifted, the gravity of the situation dawning on them. "You're the new captain?" the first officer asked, his tone suddenly serious. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because you didn't give me a chance," Jason replied, bitterness creeping into his voice. "Instead, you decided to treat us like criminals. We need to resolve this right now." The original officers bristled at Jason's words, and tension crackled in the air. The first officer who had assaulted Emma shifted uncomfortably, but held his ground. "You're out of line, Thompson," he growled. "You think you can come in here and change everything?" "Out of line," Jason echoed incredulously. "You're the ones who need to understand how far you've crossed the line. You've violated not just the law, but the very trust that we're supposed to uphold as officers." As the new officers began to question the original officers, Jason moved to Emma's side, kneeling down and taking her hand. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, his heart aching for her. "Help is on the way." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and uncertainty. "I can't believe this is happening, Jay. What if they don't believe us? What if nothing changes?" "We have to fight for what's right," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "We can't let them get away with this. We have to make sure our voices are heard." The commotion continued as the new officers pressed the original officer for answers. The tension escalated, and the air was thick with hostility. Jason knew he had to keep pushing to ensure that this moment wouldn't fade into another story of injustice. "Listen," Jason said, raising his voice to cut through the chaos. "I'm not leaving here until I know that my wife is safe and that these officers are held accountable for their actions." The first officer scoffed. "You think you can just demand justice because you wear a badge? That doesn't mean anything here." Jason's resolve hardened. "No, it means that I won't stand by while you abuse your power. I know the system, and I'm prepared to use it. This isn't over." The new officers exchanged glances again, and one of them finally spoke up. "Let's get medical assistance for her, and then we'll take statements from both sides." As they radioed for help, Jason felt a small wave of relief wash over him. It was a step in the right direction, but he knew they still had a long way to go. He turned back to Emma, trying to mask his own fear with a reassuring smile. "Help is coming," he promised. "Thank you for standing up for me, Jay," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know what I would do without you." "You'll never have to find out," he vowed, squeezing her hand again. "We're in this together." The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing closer, and the tension began to dissipate slightly. Jason knew that their lives would be irrevocably changed by this night, but he also felt a sense of determination rising within him. They would fight back against this injustice, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever faced such cruelty. As the paramedics arrived, Jason made sure that Emma received the attention she needed. But in the back of his mind, he knew that the real fight was just beginning. He had to stand up against the very institution that was supposed to protect them, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that justice prevailed. The chaos around them faded as he focused on Emma, his love for her igniting a fire in his heart. They would face this together, and no matter how difficult the path ahead might be, he knew that they would not back down. The days that followed the incident felt like a blur of emotions for Jason and Emma. The initial shock of the assault began to morph into a fierce determination to seek justice. Each moment spent in the hospital, waiting for Emma's arm to heal and for the doctors to assure them everything would be okay, solidified Jason's resolve to take action against the officers who had so carelessly wielded their power. As Emma slowly recovered, Jason spent every waking hour organizing his thoughts and gathering information. He reached out to fellow officers, hoping to find those who shared his vision of a just and equitable police force. He knew he needed allies, people who could help him expose the corruption and bring about change. One evening, as he sat in the small hospital room with Emma, he decided it was time to bring her into the conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he began, watching her closely. "I want to make sure those officers are held accountable for their actions." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. "But what if they retaliate? What if they come after you next?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't let fear control us," Jason replied, his voice steady. "We need to speak up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has faced this kind of injustice. It's time to take a stand." As they discussed their next steps, Jason shared his plan to organize a community meeting. He envisioned a gathering where people could share their stories, express their outrage, and unite against the oppressive actions of those in power. Emma's expression shifted from worry to determination as she listened. "I want to help," she said, her voice stronger now. "I can't just sit back and do nothing." The very next day, they reached out to local activists and organizations that fought against police brutality and systemic racism. To their surprise, the response was overwhelming. People wanted to share their experiences, and the movement for justice began to gain momentum. Over the following week, word spread about the upcoming community meeting. Flyers were distributed, social media posts were shared, and excitement began to build. Jason felt a sense of hope surge within him. This was more than just a fight for their own justice. It was a fight for change. When the day of the meeting arrived, the community center buzzed with energy. Jason and Emma arrived early to set up the space, making sure everything was ready for the crowd they anticipated. As people began to trickle in, Jason noticed a mix of familiar and new faces, each one filled with determination. The room filled quickly, and as Jason stood in front of the crowd, he felt a rush of nerves. He was about to speak not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice strong and steady. Tonight we gather not just to share our stories, but to ignite a movement for change. As the meeting unfolded, people shared their experiences of racial profiling, police brutality, and the pervasive fear that came with simply existing as a person of color in their community. Each story was a powerful reminder of the challenges they faced daily, and as the testimonies flowed, the room filled with emotion. Laughter mingled with tears as people connected through shared pain and resilience. Emma stood beside Jason, sharing her own story of the night they were attacked. "I never imagined this could happen to us," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We were just enjoying a beautiful evening. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Her words resonated with the crowd, and a wave of support washed over them. As the stories continued, Jason felt the urgency to take action rise within him. He knew they had to do more than just talk. They needed to hold those responsible accountable. With newfound determination, he stepped back to the front of the room. "We cannot let this stand," he declared, his voice ringing out with conviction. "We have to demand accountability from our police force. We need to unite and make our voices heard." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jason felt the energy in the room shift. They were no longer victims. They were a community ready to fight back. As the meeting came to a close, Jason announced their next steps. "We'll be organizing a protest outside the police station next week. We need to show them that we won't stand for this kind of violence any longer. We need to demand change, and we need all of you to join us." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The room filled with chants of support and determination, a chorus of voices united in their mission. Jason felt a surge of hope wash over him. They were no longer alone in this fight. After the meeting, as people began to disperse, Jason and Emma stood together, taking in the energy of the crowd. "We did it," Emma said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We really did it." Jason smiled, the weight of the world beginning to lift from his shoulders. "This is just the beginning. We have to keep pushing, keep fighting for what's right." As they left the community center, hand in hand, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but together they were ready to face whatever came their way. They were no longer just victims. They were agents of change, and nothing would stand in their way. The day of the protest dawned bright and clear, the sun shining down on the gathering crowd outside the police station. Jason and Emma arrived early, feeling the electric energy of the people around them. Banners flew high, each one adorned with powerful slogans demanding justice, equality, and an end to police brutality. The atmosphere was charged with determination and hope, a palpable shift in the air that made Jason's heart race. As they approached the crowd, Jason spotted familiar faces, neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had come together for a common cause. Each person held a story, a reason for being there, and it filled him with a profound sense of solidarity. Emma squeezed his hand tightly, her grip a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, looking into his eyes, seeking reassurance. "More than ever," he replied, his voice steady. "Today is about making our voices heard." As the clock struck noon, Jason stepped up to the makeshift stage, where a microphone awaited him. The crowd quieted, and all eyes turned toward him. He took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. But he knew he had to speak for everyone who had suffered. "Thank you all for being here today," he called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Today, we stand united to demand justice and accountability. We are here to say that we will not tolerate violence and discrimination any longer." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Jason felt a surge of energy. He continued, "This isn't just about what happened to Emma and me. It's about everyone who has faced injustice, who has been silenced or pushed aside because of the color of their skin. We will not be silenced." With each word, the crowd responded with shouts of agreement. The sense of community was overwhelming, and Jason felt invigorated by their collective strength. He spoke passionately, sharing their story, and highlighting the need for reforms within the police department. "We demand a transparent investigation into the actions of those officers. We demand change." As Jason spoke, Emma watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride. She had seen the journey they had taken together, from the moment of the attack to this powerful moment of defiance. Each story shared and each voice raised was a testament to their strength and resilience. After Jason finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause, chanting slogans of justice and unity. It was a beautiful symphony of voices rising together, echoing through the streets. However, as the chants grew louder, Emma noticed a few police officers standing at the edge of the gathering, their expressions serious and unreadable. A flicker of anxiety crept into her mind. She glanced at Jason, who seemed to be caught up in the moment, oblivious to the tension brewing just beyond the crowd. Suddenly, a commotion broke out near the front. A group of counter-protesters, emboldened by hatred, began shouting slurs and inciting violence. Their aggressive chants clashed with the peaceful message of the gathering, and the atmosphere shifted dramatically. "Stay calm," Jason shouted into the microphone, trying to quell the tension. "This is a peaceful protest. We won't stoop to their level." But the counter-protesters advanced, their shouts growing louder, trying to drown out the message of justice and equality. Emma's heart raced as she watched the situation escalate. Fear gripped her, but she knew they had to remain united. As the two groups clashed verbally, Jason stepped down from the stage, moving towards the front lines. "We're not here to fight. We're here for change," he called out, trying to reason with both sides. The tension reached a breaking point as the counter-protesters began to shove their way through the crowd. Jason felt a surge of adrenaline, his protective instincts kicking in. He pushed forward, determined to prevent violence from erupting. "Everyone, stand together. Don't let them provoke you," he shouted, his voice ringing with authority. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the hope they had built threatening to crumble. Just then, Emma spotted a familiar face in the crowd, one of the officers from the original incident. Anger flared within her, but she quickly composed herself. "This isn't the time," she murmured, clenching her fists. The officer, recognizing Jason, made his way through the crowd, his demeanor smug and condescending. "What's going on here?" he sneered, trying to assert control over the situation. "You think you can just rally against the police?" Jason turned to face him, his jaw clenched. "We're not rallying against the police, we're rallying for justice. You know what your colleagues did was wrong. You know we have every right to stand here." The officer laughed derisively, crossing his arms. "You think your badge gives you power? You're just another black cop trying to make a name for yourself." The crowd gasped, and Emma felt her heart drop. She wanted to shout, to demand respect for Jason. But instead, she stood frozen, watching the confrontation unfold. "Enough," Jason shouted, his voice booming. "This isn't about me or my badge. This is about people standing up for what's right. This is about equality." The officer's face twisted in contempt, but as he opened his mouth to respond, The situation took an unexpected turn. Another officer, one who had been quietly observing the chaos, stepped forward. "This needs to stop now," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This protest is protected under our rights. You cannot intimidate these people." Jason turned, surprised by the support. Emma felt a rush of hope. Perhaps not all officers were aligned with the corrupt ones. The original officer's bravado faltered, his face reddening with anger. "You think you can just let them disrespect the badge? They're nothing but trouble." "Trouble or not, they have every right to be here," the new officer countered. "We're supposed to protect our community, not oppress it. We can't let fear rule us." The tension began to dissipate as more officers moved in, creating a barrier between the two groups. The crowd, witnessing the internal divide among the police, began to chant louder for justice, their voices rising in a wave of unity. Jason seized the moment. "This is the change we need," he shouted, urging the crowd to stay strong. "This is what happens when we stand together. We will not be silenced." As the protest continued, the counter-protesters began to disperse, realizing their aggression was not met with fear, but with solidarity. Jason and Emma looked at each other, their hearts pounding with adrenaline and determination. The atmosphere shifted, transforming from one of conflict to one of unity. Jason felt a renewed sense of hope wash over him. They had started a movement, a ripple of change that could not be ignored. As the rally continued, Jason and Emma stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew the fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time, they felt they weren't alone in the struggle. Together, they would ensure their voices were heard, and they would not back down. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Jason and Emma. The protest had sparked a movement, drawing attention not only from local media but also from civil rights organizations across the country. People began to rally behind their cause, sharing their own stories of injustice and demanding accountability from the police force. Jason found himself at the center of this whirlwind, navigating the complexities of his role as captain. While many of his colleagues supported the movement, there were those who resisted change, clinging to the status quo. As the pressure mounted, Jason felt the weight of the badge heavier than ever. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Jason returned home to find Emma sitting on the couch, a stack of flyers in front of her. "I've been thinking," she said, her brow furrowed with determination. "We need to take this to the next level. We can't just stop here." "What do you mean?" Jason asked, intrigued but wary. "I mean we should organize a town hall meeting with the community and the police department," Emma suggested. "Let's put them on the spot. We need to hold them accountable in front of everyone." Jason nodded, feeling the spark of her enthusiasm ignite his own. "That's a great idea. If we can get the community to participate and voice their concerns directly, it could push for real change." They worked tirelessly to prepare for the meeting, reaching out to community leaders and ensuring that everyone felt welcome to express their views. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday, and the excitement was palpable. As the day approached, Jason found himself wrestling with a mix of anxiety and hope. He knew that this meeting would be pivotal, not just for their community but for his career and the future of policing in Millwood. He had to stand firm in the face of potential backlash, knowing that some officers might view his actions as betrayal. When the day of the town hall arrived, the community center was packed. Residents filled every seat, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Jason took a deep breath as he stepped up to the podium, looking out at the faces that had come to support change. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady but passionate. "This is a historic moment for our community, and it's time for us to have an honest conversation about policing and the systemic issues that have caused so much pain and division." The crowd erupted in applause, their voices echoing his sentiment. As he spoke, Jason outlined the steps the police department would take to improve transparency and accountability. He acknowledged the failures of the past and emphasized that their community deserved better. But the real breakthrough came when Emma took the stage. "We are here, not just to talk about what happened to us, but to empower every single one of you to speak out," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "We are stronger together, and we cannot allow fear to silence us any longer." As she shared her story, recounting the pain and humiliation of that night, her words resonated deeply with the audience. People began to share their experiences, recounting the injustices they had faced, their voices rising in a chorus of solidarity. Jason watched in awe as the crowd grew more animated, united in their desire for change. But just as the atmosphere reached a fever pitch, the doors to the community center burst open, and a group of officers strode in. Among them was the same officer who had assaulted Emma. The room fell silent, and tension filled the air as they stood at the back, arms crossed, expressions hard. Jason felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had anticipated their presence, but seeing them there, ready to undermine everything they had worked for, made his blood boil. "Looks like the circus is in town," the officer sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's all this about?" Jason stepped forward, determination burning in his eyes. "This is about holding you and your colleagues accountable for your actions. We won't let you intimidate us anymore." The officer laughed, but the laughter quickly turned to anger. "You think you can just stand up here and demand respect? You're nothing but a pawn, Thompson. This will end badly for you." "Not if we stand together," Jason replied, his voice firm. "You're going to hear the truth today." The tension in the room was palpable as both sides faced off, but Jason refused to back down. Emma took a deep breath, stepping beside him, her hand clasping his tightly. "This is our community, and we have the right to demand change," she shouted, her voice echoing through the space. "We deserve respect, and we won't be silenced." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising in support of Jason and Emma. The officers, realizing they were outnumbered, shifted uneasily. It was clear that this wasn't just a protest, it was a revolution. In that moment, Jason felt a surge of power. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had suffered, every story that needed to be told. "We will not stop until there is justice," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. But just as the crowd began to chant, a commotion erupted from the back. The officer who had assaulted Emma moved forward, his expression dark and menacing. "You think this will change anything?" he shouted. "I'll make sure you regret this, all of you." Before Jason could react, the officer lunged toward him, and chaos erupted in the community center. People screamed and surged backward, but Jason stood his ground, ready to confront the officer. In that instant, everything shifted. As the officer approached, Jason felt a rush of adrenaline course through him. "You will not intimidate me any longer," he shouted, stepping forward to meet the officer. The room seemed to hold its breath as the two men faced each other, the tension crackling like electricity. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood firm, knowing that he was not alone. The voices of the crowd surrounded him, a testament to the strength of their collective resolve. With a sudden movement, the officer raised his hand, but before he could strike, another officer stepped in, pulling him back. "Enough!" the newcomer shouted, his voice booming through the chaos. "We won't allow this!" The scene transformed as officers began to separate the two groups, the crowd rallying together in solidarity. Jason's heart raced, and he felt a wave of relief wash over him as the officer who had threatened him was restrained. As the situation began to stabilize, Jason turned to Emma, who stood by his side, her eyes wide with emotion. "We did it," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "We stood up for ourselves." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising in triumph as they realized that they had reclaimed their power. The moment felt electric, a turning point in their fight for justice. As they left the community center, hand in hand, Jason and Emma knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But together they had taken a stand, and their love for each other and their community would guide them through the darkness. This was just the beginning. They would continue to fight, not only for themselves, but for everyone who had faced injustice. The flame of hope burned brightly within them, a reminder that their voices would not be silenced, and they would not back down. In the face of adversity, they found strength in each other and in their community. They were ready to face whatever lay ahead, united in their mission to create a better future, one where love and justice prevailed over hate and fear. We hope that this story has affected you. This is not just a story, but a reminder that there is still injustice in the world that can and should be fought. We want to hear your thoughts. Write in the comments what you would do if you were in the place of the heroes, and what feelings this video caused you. Your every opinion helps us fight for the truth and spread these stories. If this story has touched you, subscribe to the channel and like it. It's your support that helps us continue this fight. Thank you for being with us, and remember, you are our inspiration on this path to justice.